Hello and welcome to another video on my favourite 5 games for a letter arcade edition, and this is for the letter E. Now you all know the drill. Now this is where I choose my personal top 5 favourite games per letter, imagining that all others I would not be able to play. Consequently, this is not what games are most important to video game history or even loved by most, but for me, what are my personal favourites that I love to play the most. Now, as I go through this video game series, the choices may surprise you. To be honest, they've surprised me, but it's an interesting exercise, and what I hope is, of course, is I give you some of my thoughts and suggestions as we go through these arcade games. It might encourage you the next time you're looking at these countless number of games to play on these retro-laden lists out there, that it may get you playing specific ones again and rekindle some of these loves for what is often forgotten gems. Okay, as I mentioned, this is the letter E for the arcades, so without further ado, let us begin. Okay, for my number 5 game, I've chosen Jaliko, the 1991 shooter EDF, Earth Defense Force. Now this is a brilliant horizontal shooter with the amazing accompanying music by Tsusaka Tawada. Yes, he of Rodland music fame, who does another great library of tunes here. Now in the game you play a crack elite squadron as you take out the swarms of alien enemies everywhere. Now it might not be doing anything special per se with this horizontal shooter, but what is there is solid and so much fun, especially in the opening levels. Now I have to say, unfortunately the later levels are not quite as engaging as you progress through, but there's still enough here in the early levels, I think, to make it my number 5 game. Now as I mentioned, there's not really anything particularly unique about this, but one unique element I suppose is the power-up system. This is where you can power up different weapons types as you kill more throughout the levels, so like an RPG, build up your weapon types and decide which ones to concentrate on, switching to the ones you particularly want to use for certain levels. Also, as you play through the game, there's 2 different modes to the weapons. You can do your standard concentrated shot or press the secondary button to do a wider spread of shots that are weaker but take out more enemies over a wider range. Now the different weapons here are really good, and it does bring and elevate the game, in my opinion, above many of its peers. You know, I actually find it intriguing, to be honest, the negative response that this gets across the board from especially shoot 'em up aficionados, because for me personally, I love playing this game. It's solidly written and it keeps you engaged, and on a typical playthrough I love it to bits. Now one thing about the game is that it only ever received a SNES port, which I think is inferior, and I often wonder how many people that are critiquing the arcade version are actually critiquing the SNES version in their memories of it. The SNES version isn't bad, don't get me wrong, but it definitely pales in comparison to the arcade parent. It only allowed one single player, and it does tweak and change the levels in making the overall experience inferior, in my opinion. Now, to play this game today is quite difficult outside of MAME, although admittedly I have seen it on Antstream, so there's a great opportunity to play it there as well. Anyway, give this fun shooter a try today. Okay, for my 4th game I've chosen the Atari 1989 title Escape from the Planet of Robot Monsters. This lesser known Atari game has 1 or 2 people running around Planet X, a whole planet where the robots have risen up and overthrown their human overlords, enslaving them. Your purpose in this isometric blastathon is to play through running around shooting countless robots that swarm all around you, and it's that what I love about this game. It's like Gauntlet but on an isometric level, packed with humour and cartoon graphics and animations, making it so much fun and full of madcap antics on a full frantic all-out action. The levels here and the art style is always pretty, and it's great seeing you run frantically around shooting these swarms of enemies in every direction, trying not to shoot the enslaved humans and flicking large switches to start up escalators to take you to the next section. Then, interspersed with these standard levels, you get to fly in your trusty craft to make it to the exit before the countdown, going through a maze, making sure that you make all the right turns. Now, all before the timer goes down to 0 and it causes a big explosion. Now, this game was made by Mark Pierce, and he would go on to design Pit Fighter, Clax, before going on to the Midway division that bought out Atari to do the San Francisco Rush games. So you'd know this is a guy that understands how to do fun, and he's shown it here as always. Now, I loved this game back in the day, especially on my Amiga, because the Amiga and ST port by Domark is really solid and captures the arcade game really well. Now, playing it on MAME, I do find you do need to play it on an analog stick as opposed to the standard arcade stick. Now, the reason is the arcade original actually had 16 directions of shot, and your arcade joysticks typically only have 8, making it difficult to play. Having said that, Arcade Club does have this beautiful rare machine in Bury in England, so you can finally play this game as it was originally intended, and it's so much fun to do so. Okay, let's go on to my third choice, and for this I've gone for the Sega 1986 racing classic Enduro Racer. Now, in the game you race on a dirt bike across a dangerous off-road track strewn with mad rocks and obstacles blocking your way. Now, what we basically have here is the game Hang On, but with jumps strewn around the levels and the ability to wheelie by pulling back on the handlebars on the arcade cabinet, which you must do so as you hit the ramp to then take off and do huge long jumps, then bringing down the bike as you come to land safely. This single element really adds another part to the game that is so much fun. By doing these huge leaps and watching the scenery hurtle below you, and then to make the perfect landing, dodging all the remaining objects and obstacles, is a fantastic experience that you seldom see in racing games. Now, like the Hang On game, the timer here is quite tough, with you having to negotiate pretty much the perfect track to make your way to the next checkpoint before that timer runs out. But it's worth persevering, as each time you get that little bit further as you make your way through all the interesting levels. Now, back in the day, this saw some amazing home ports of this game, with particularly the Spectrum version being particularly impressive and swallowing up loads of times of specky players everywhere who were lucky enough to own it. Now, outside the home computers on the 8-bits, the only console release that was done was on the Master System. But just a heads up, although it's quite a good game, this is a completely different game to the arcade original, being from an isometric viewpoint. Now, since that time, Sega's never ever seemed to release it, sadly, so unfortunately today the only place to play it is on MAME, unless you're lucky enough to see it out in the wild in one of the arcades. Okay, for my number 2 choice, I've gone for the game Elevator Action Returns, or Elevator Action 2 as it's also known by. It's by Taito and it was released in 1995. Now, I've got to be honest, I'm not actually much of a fan of the first game in the series that was released in 1983, but this update does so much more to the game and makes it consequently so much fun that it's definitely one of my favourites. Now, in the game you play from a choice of 3 operatives who must negotiate all the buildings using the lifts and entering certain coloured doors to aid progression. Now, blue doors give you bonus or power-ups, and red doors, meanwhile, they have to be entered to make a lift work or something that ensures your progression. Now, I adore this game. It all runs so fluidly, really testing your arcade gaming chops as you blast your way through the countless nice variety of 6 levels and their many enemies, even though I always feel a bit guilty when I'm constantly having to shoot the dogs in this game. Now, over the years I have played the arcade perfect Japanese Saturn port of this game and loved every minute, and I suppose therefore I've grown real nostalgic love for the title. But for those not lucky enough to own a Saturn, let alone the Japanese import of the game, which takes a lot of money today, this does emulate, as you can see here, brilliantly in MAME. And I also believe that this is in the Arcade Club of Leeds, so there's a wonderful opportunity to play it on real hardware for what is quite considered a rare arcade game to track down and play. So So give this fun, brilliant blaster a go today and you won't be disappointed. Okay, let's go on to my number one game for the letter E. And for this, I've chosen the vertical shooter ESP Galuda, released in 2003 by Cave. Now this is the second in the ESP shooter series, being the sequel to their 1998 game ESP Rabe. Now to be honest, I could have chosen that or even the third ESP Galuda 2, as I think all are amazing, but I've decided to go for this one because it was the first one I personally discovered back in the day, and so therefore have played the most. Now the title actually means butterfly with extra sensory powers, and this has you play two siblings called Agaha and Tateha with superpowers who must take out the enemy army. Now I have to say, this is actually one of my favourite shooters of all time. I love the visual steampunk meets fantasy look, and the idea of you're actually a flying person as opposed to a ship, make you feel a bit like a superhero. Now one of the things special about the game is you can trigger in it Kakuse, which is through the second fire button. Now what this does, it allows you to do kind of like a magic to slow down the bullets. They change colour and they move slower, and it allows you temporarily to negotiate the quite frankly manic bullet patterns being hurled at you to make your way through. Now of course the trouble is, this is a special mode that uses up green gems, and so you only have a short time before you use up all the gems that you've picked up. And that's about it from a game point of view. It's got great bosses, great weaponry, and it's all perfection as you come to know and love with Cave shooters. But I adore it. I love all the complex patterns and that look that people see when they see you negotiate all these countless bullets hurling at you from all directions. Now the game is made by Tsuneki Ikeda, and of course many of the team behind such games as Dudonpachi and Ketsu, Mushi Mushi Pork and Mushi Time Sama, some of my favourite shooters of all time. But for this game we only actually saw a PS2 port back in the day, although for the sequel there is a brilliant version on the Xbox 360 for ESP Galuda 2. Now these days, sadly, the only other place to play it is in places like Arcade Club or on MAME, and sadly it doesn't seem to be one that particularly gets on any other platform. But as you can see, MAME does a great job here, so there's no excuse to track down this gem of a game today. Okay, they were my top 5 games for the letter E, but as always there was a stack of amazing games and big hitters worthy of a shout out that just didn't make my list. So I'm going to spend some time mentioning some of those games now. Okay, first we have Nintendo's Excite Bike. Now many probably don't appreciate that this was originally an arcade game before making it onto the NES, and there's a few subtle changes and slightly better graphics to the NES original. Now this is a great fun game, although it is brutal and quite frustrating, that can sometimes annoy the gamers playing it, myself included. Next, an honourable mention goes to Euro Champ 92 by Taito. Now this is a surprisingly fun arcade football game, definitely one of my favourites. It plays so well passing from player to player and getting in those goals, but you do get the feeling that the Japanese developers involved in the game never actually seen a game of football before. It's funny, the simple things like getting the right kit colours for the different teams are wrong, with England being in the blue kit for example, just make me personally smile out. And little touches as such as the ref getting hit by the ball, or likewise a shot hitting one of the cameramen, just nice touches that make me smile from ear to ear. Okay, another title worthy of mention is Express Raider. Now this is a screen-by-screen fighter and a lot of fun as you single-handedly stop a great train robbery in the Wild West, making your way from screen to screen. And it's a fun beat-em-up really, mixed in with some nice running at the side of the train shooting sections as well. Now another game that I feel I should mention is 18 Wheeler by Sega. Now I realise I'm cheating a bit here because I suppose you could say it should be in the number section, but I felt a bit guilty that I didn't include it there, so I've decided to use the E for the 18 Wheeler by Sega, and it does say it on the marquee. What you have here is the American truck being driven across America. It's fun, and I love some of the things and the Mad Cat craziness as you sort of smash things out the way. But as I progress, I find it's not actually an all-out classic that I perhaps love in the same way I love, say, Crazy Taxi. Now, of course, another game worthy of mention is Empire Strikes Back. This was an upgrade kit to the original Atari Star Wars arcade cabinet, and it tries to take those original levels but put in new ones to fit around the second film. So you've got probe droid section, you've got bringing down the AT-ATs with the tow rope, an asteroid level, and TIE fighter battles. I guess it feels a bit messy, this one, although it still in many ways should be on paper just as fun. I think part of it is there's no real final standout moment in the same way that you get with the original Star Wars film. And that's perhaps its problem, but it definitely is nowhere near the original classic. Now, thankfully for this one, incidentally, it is a hidden game on the Rebel Strike game on the GameCube along with the original and Return of the Jedi, so well worth tracking it down and playing it on there. Now, along with those games, there's some amazing shooters that are well worthy of mention as well. One hidden gem is Exorzeus. Now, this is a fantastic Taito horizontal shooter, and I think many of you probably have never heard of it, but it's well worth tracking down and giving it a go. It plays fast and it's as smooth as butter, being a huge amount of fun as you take out all the enemies on the game. It's definitely a great shooter. Now, other fantastic blasters, as I mentioned on my number one choice, the other games in the ESP series. The first one is ESP Rade from Cave, which is, as I mentioned, the first in that series. Now, I love this high school setting, the bullet hell blaster, going across really interesting landscapes and brilliant bullet patterns. And to be honest, on a different day between any of these ESP titles, I could probably interchange them depending on how I feel. But definitely this is one that should be played. Now finally, of course, there's ESP Galuda 2. This takes what the first one did and in many ways refines things, and you could argue improves over the original. I guess I just have more memories of ESP Galuda 1. However, this does have an amazing Xbox 360 port as well, so this is a great one to track down and play. Okay, there you go. That is my top 5 games for the letter E. I hope you enjoyed, and look out for my next video where I look at the letter F for the arcade. And don't forget, as always, I'm on the Retro Gaming Discussion Show, or RGDS, which is a free podcast where we talk about all things retro gaming related. So try and catch me on there as well. Well, until next time, keep it retro.